think hearing people's personal stories is really, really helpful. So I'm going to try and not get too personal, but it is pretty personal.
I've never shared this before, but for 15 years I didn't touch a paintbrush. I stopped making art completely. And with that, I didn't just stop painting, I lost the ability to tune in with myself. Swept away down a river of responsibilities, expectations, conventions, and I ended up finding myself in a version of success that truly didn't feel like my own life. This isn't just a story about art. It's about what happens when you walk away from a life that looked fine on the outside to reclaim the soul you buried to survive. The unexpected turning point, a messy truth, and the quiet rebellion that saved my soul. For the first time, I'm sharing what really brought me back to painting after 15 years. And if you've ever felt like you've lost parts of yourself along the way, maybe this will help bring some of your spark back too.
I'm just going to get comfy first and have a think about how I want to explain this, really, because it's really important to me. I recently passed a bit of a milestone in the sense that I had a Free My Soul Day, what I call a Free My Soul Day, which is actually, I just started talking to you and the memory card was full. So I'm not getting on very well with the tech stuff at the moment. Going back into my sort of my own timeline, because within my journals, and also, like I say, I've passed this anniversary of my Free My Soul Day, which is the middle of July. That's the anniversary, and that's the day I left my teaching career in schools, in UK schools, and I called that freeing my soul. And I really feel like actually I freed my soul. I carried my letter of resignation in my pocket at work for months and months and months before I made my final decision to knock on my head teacher's door and have the conversation and physically hand him the letter. So it was a long process coming back to my artwork, and I just was thinking, what brought me back to painting? Why did I really start painting again? And so I've been delving into that, into my journaling, and I thought it might help other people's journeys back into creativity, because I believe that creativity is so healing, and if we can bring it back into our lives, it's really important to do that in whatever way, shape or form our creativity comes out. So I'm going to take a big deep breath and a stretch, and try not to be getting too personal, but it is pretty personal, so of course, because it's a story. So, and feel free to leave your comments and thoughts and your own stories down below as well. Quite a few people in the last few videos have been leaving their own experiences, and it's so helpful for other people to read. I put in the comments, I think I replied to somebody this morning, and she'd saved her own life by doing this, and I said, well, someone else reading this, you might have literally saved theirs as well, because that will encourage them to go in that direction. So she'd left an abusive relationship and found her freedom and found love again as well. So that was a beautiful comment, and I really appreciate that if that was you. And if you've read that comment and it's helped you, then I love that so much. I've made myself a list of questions to kind of deep dive. I'm just finding them now. So let's get cozy and comfy. I do have a drink as well. So cheers to you if you're joining me. I think I'm going to start off with my emotional roots. And feel free to ask yourself these questions as well, if that's helpful. Journal about them. They could be journaling prompts. Anyway, my first question to myself was, what was I feeling most often in the weeks or months before I picked up my brush again? And by brush, I mean pencils or whatever material it is. So it could be cooking pots, gardening, gloves, embroidery, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be paintbrushes, of course. So what was I feeling most often? I think I was feeling a loss of identity. It had been years since I had been creative, really, in that way, in my painterly fashion. And so I was feeling lost, like I'd lost my way, and I was feeling empty inside, and like a part of my identity wasn't there anymore. Was there a moment where it felt too much? I think as an outlet, creativity, and for me that's painting, was definitely a way to help me create spaces and calm and process stuff, life stuff, big stuff, and also a way to breathe again. I almost felt like I wasn't breathing properly while I was in my teaching career. It was really, really challenging and really, really stressful, and I guess it will come up in here why I actually left that job. I had 2 or 3 different schools that I worked at, full-time at one school, then I left that one, and then I was full-time at another school, and then I did some supply teaching work as well, sort of within that process of freeing myself, if you like. But I felt like I needed something to express myself that wasn't words. Does that make sense? The artistic, visual, colour, shape, form, language to express myself. I guess I felt swallowed by my life, by my own life. Yeah, swallowed up in the musts and the shoulds instead of what I really wanted to do with my time, how I wanted to spend my own time. So the next question I asked myself was kind of to put my life in context, if you like, and it was what was happening in my life when I returned to painting. Was I grieving, burnt out, bored, disconnected, healing, etc.? I was definitely healing, I was definitely disconnected, I was definitely grieving, I was definitely super burnt out to the point of being in real dire straits with it. I got every illness under the sun, especially, when it was half term and summer holidays, Christmas holidays and that kind of thing. I just spent the whole holiday really, really sick. And I had some time off with that. But it tended to be that you were under so much pressure to be in your classroom that even if you were ill, you would show up, which wasn't helpful at all. But that was kind of like the expectation, really. And it was only if you were really, really poorly that it was acceptable to stay off. I remember a head teacher saying to me, my first school I worked at, I had tonsillitis, throat infection, had lost my voice, had a high temperature, and I'd been in school all week, and it was Thursday and I was on playground duty, and the head teacher came out after the whistle blew. I lined up all the children outside on the playground in lines. So regimented school, and looking back now, I see the way of the control on the children. It's just like, it doesn't quite make sense to me. It doesn't quite add up properly. But anyway, that's a bit of a digression in topic, so maybe I'll get to that later. Anyway, she came out and she was saying, you're not been great in the classroom. She used to hide around the corners. We were in a kind of semi-open plan school, so she could easily just spy on you and you wouldn't know. And she used to do that to everybody. Very controlling, and she set up a lot of bullying situations amongst the staff. It was quite a toxic work environment, I have to say. I was very glad to be out of there. But she came out and she said, you've not been great in the classroom this week. And I was like, I've lost my voice. And I feel absolutely awful. I've got a high temperature. I feel sick. I'm really, really struggling, but I've come in. But I don't think I can come in tomorrow, if I'm really honest. I'll, do the rest of today. I'll struggle through, but I'm not going to be great in the classroom, but at least I'm there for the children. And she was like, oh, can't you just work tomorrow? It's Friday. And I remember being really shocked by that reaction, because she could see I was really, really poorly. I wasn't, putting it on at all. I'm not like that anyway, but anyway, it turned out the next day I didn't go to work, and I rang in sick because I was so poorly. I'd been throwing up and all sorts, and I was just like a mess. I would have been awful. I wouldn't have been responsible for the kids. I wouldn't have been in a fit state for that. So it wasn't safe that I was in charge of the responsibility of a classroom full of kids, 30 children. So I rang in sick, and when I got back on Monday, she completely changed. She was completely different with me, absolutely couldn't stand me, and bullied me a lot from that point. And that was, I think, my second year there. So I'd only just done my newly qualified teacher year. In the UK, you do a newly qualified teacher year called your QTS or your QTs. And so I was only in my first proper year of actually teaching. And I just thought, I've got to get out of this school. And it took me to have a car crash a year later, so another year, I was in my third year, to actually, have that smack of realisation that I really had to get out of there. I was on my way to school, and then somebody went in the back of me. It was like a 5-car pile-up. And yeah, it was quite a serious accident. Somebody had to get cut out of their car, the car behind me, and I was trapped in my car. Yeah, and then I got quite a few injuries from that as well. So I was off work quite a while, and I went back with a therapeutic return with the realization of I need to get out of this school, which I did. And then I ended up in another school, which was a lovely school, and I loved it there, and I loved the staff there, and I loved the head teacher there, and it was just absolutely amazing. But it was just so much pressure. And of course the head teachers and the management team, they get pressure from the local authorities, who get pressure from the government, and milestones and goalposts were always shifting and changing. So just when you thought you had your head around things, it would shift again, or they'd change the name of something and just put it under a different umbrella. And there was always more and more responsibilities thrown at you. Plus there were, a lot of the children that were in the special schools with really, really special needs, they integrated them into a lot of the classrooms, which wasn't necessarily the best thing for a lot of the children that came out of the special schools that needed more one-to-one or small group assistance and support. And also it wasn't good for the children in the classrooms, because a lot of the teachers' attention would have to go to these children. So it became very challenging. And then you had support staff, but because of budgets and the lack of finances, you didn't get support as much as you needed it, if at all, sometimes. Lots of teachers were off sick, there was lots of illness, lots of with stress as well. And so you ended up sort of, because of budgets, they couldn't get a supply teacher in, so you would have extra children from different classes because their teachers weren't in. So there was just more and more and more and more pressure put on you. And then of course you've got all the inspections. So you've got internal inspections from your own management team and head teacher, you have got Ofsted and that kind of thing. Going through Ofsteds was probably one of the most stressful things I've ever done. It was just really hard. And I remember doing one Ofsted inspection when I actually had tonsillitis again, but I didn't again dare be off. Anyway, that's the context of what was going on, and I was in that environment for 13 years, and it was just suffocating me, paralysing me, and crushing all the creativity out of me. Even though I was being creative in the classroom and doing creative things with the children and cooking and artwork and all that stuff, most of it was focused on numeracy skills, literacy skills, and making sure that I was doing a good job in the classroom, so being inspected all the time. So it was lots of inspections as well. I feel like I lost myself, became completely disconnected from everything. I had no energy for anything else in my life, so I could barely, go for a walk in nature at the weekend because I was so exhausted. Plus I had loads of work to do at the weekends to hand in ready, 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, all your planning and your assessments and everything to be scrutinised by the management team. So, they would be really on it and on you if you were lacking in any way. Looking back now, I don't know how I maintained it for so long. Well, I remember telling James first of all and saying, look, I've had enough. And he was like, I think you should leave. And we had a different house. This was before van life day, so it was before we ran away in a van, which is part of my process. So if you've seen those videos, there are a few up on YouTube telling the story of that. But this was before, so we had a mortgage to pay. So I was like, I need this income to pay the bills, to keep the house that we just bought. James was like, no, you need to leave. He's a keeper. And I remember sitting and saying to my mum, I think I'm just gonna, I used to love working in a cafe. I think I'm just gonna quit this and just go and work in a cafe to get some money coming in, to pay the bills, and then just, paint. And I had this thing in my head that I was going to paint fairies. One of the things that happened was there was a little competition at school. It wasn't actually a competition, it was design a Christmas card, but I don't think it was a competition actually, I've got that wrong. And it was basically inviting all, staff and children alike to design a Christmas card, send it off, and then you would get some printed versions of that to send to your friends and family at Christmas. And I thought, oh, that's a really, really nice idea. And one of my colleagues said to me, I think you should definitely do that because you're arty, aren't you? You should definitely do that. So I kind of thought, oh, I haven't done any drawing for years, literally. And, at least 10 years. I don't even know if I can draw anymore. I don't even know if I can do it. I'm scared to put pencil to paper because it might be absolutely, awful and terrible and really bad, and I'll just be so embarrassed and ashamed of it. Anyway, I thought, what the heck? So I got my this really cheap paper and whatever pencils I had. And James always has art supplies at home as well, because he loves to draw, or he used to love to draw, and he's very, very good as well. If you didn't know that about James, he's very good at drawing. That's how we met on our art foundation course. Anyway, sidetracking again, sorry. That's just one of my, neurodivergent tendencies, I have to say. I have a few, and I'm noticing them more and more. Anyway, so I ended up being really inspired by an artist called Stephen Mackey, and I drew one of his fairies that he'd painted, and I did a drawing from it. And it was like a fairy in a beautiful flowing gown with beautiful wings, and it was just done in graphite. And I think I've still got it somewhere. I think when I look back on it, there was bits and bobs were in the wrong place, and the wings look a bit weird and they're in the wrong place. But, at the end of the day, it was the first drawing I'd done. And I just did one drawing. I didn't have time, to do like 10 different drawings and pick one. I only had time to do this one. So I went for it, and I put it in and posted it, and then I got a load of cards back. And when I got the cards back, I added some kind of glitter to the wings and just kind of zhuzhed them up a little bit, added a little bit of embellishments. And they were really cute and pretty. And it kind of sparked my energy off into that direction again. I thought, if I can just do a little drawing completely out of the blue without warming up and without being in the practice of it, and it's not terrible, then maybe I've still got a little bit of my essence of being an artist, of who I am. My identity was that. I was always an artist all through my childhood. That was part of my identity. That was my thing, my artwork. My mum was the same. My mum's very artistic, and one of my brothers as well. All my family are very creative in different ways, I have to say. But my brother, who actually passed away, I lost him, unfortunately, but he always encouraged me when I was a child, to draw things, go out in nature and sit in the garden and draw from observation. Yeah, happy memories of that. My great encourager, as well as my mum. So a spark lit up in my head, and I think I taught for another year or two before I had, my letter in my pocket, and I handed it in. After months and months of having it in my pocket, made the decision. So that was my life. I think it was to do with taking back control of my time, taking back control of my energy, taking back control of my identity, which I feel like had been stolen from me because of all the pressures and the shoulds and musts of life. Having to pay the bills, being expected. There were certain people in my life that didn't really accept me until I had this teaching profession. And then it was like I was a respected member of society or whatever, where before I was a single mum, and I wasn't really, I was at fine art school doing a degree and all that stuff, but it wasn't really impressive in that sense. And so I felt like I should, step into those boots, and which is completely meaningless to me now, because it's like, well, what does that even mean? But I remember getting letters and cards off people when I qualified saying, well done, you've done amazing and stuff. And I thought, I never got that when I, had my child and brought my child up mostly on my own till she was about 7 or 8. Not that I expected pats on the back, but just some kind of words of encouragement and support. I didn't get that much. And I did when I qualified as a teacher. So it was a big difference, I noticed. But I felt it had stolen my life from me and was suffocating my soul. And so that's why I called it, I'm going to free my soul, because it literally was that. So I've just had a little break from talking because I've been talking quite a lot. So the next questions I started asking myself was about my inner needs. Did I feel like I was getting my inner needs met? And had I missed a part of myself that now had been suffocated, silenced and buried? And I really, really did. I didn't feel like Wendy anymore. I really felt like somebody else that was acting a part, if you like. It was a really strange situation, because sometimes being in the classroom is a little bit like, you know, being on stage where you've got to act. You know, you do a lot of drama and in literature and that kind of thing, and you have to present and you have to do the classroom management. So, you know, if you've got misbehaviours and people, you know, doing things perhaps they shouldn't, then you've got to kind of keep a track of all that as well. So it was, yeah, a lot of losing myself in order to step into the boots and be that persona, if you like. So I was still me, and I still used to have fun and giggle and, you know, build a lovely relationship up with my children in the class, as well as the parents as well. Some of my parents were absolutely amazing, loved them to bits. But yeah, like completely falling in love with most of the kids, absolutely amazing kids. There was some very rewarding aspects of it, but at the same time I was missing my freedom. In the journaling prompt this month, I do a prompt every month in the Patreon, so if you want to join that, it's our little journaling community, and we do the pop-in cafe and all sorts of things. It's really, really fun. But the prompt this month was all about freedom, so I did lots and lots of different prompts around the topic, the theme of freedom. And, you know, this came up for me as part of that, because I just feel like my freedom had been stolen from me in a really big way. I didn't feel I was being useful for myself, for my inner soul. I didn't feel I could grow properly as a person. I didn't feel I could get past certain traumas and experiences. I didn't feel like I could allow myself to grow and process stuff, because I was too busy ticking everyone else's boxes and answering everybody else's needs within this massive basket of needs that's needed in a classroom situation. That part of me just wasn't there anymore. It just, you know, I needed to be seen. I needed to be seen as my actual identity, as I actually wanted to shine my soul out there in the way I wanted to, and not be buried in that way. I wanted to take up my space again, you know, as an artist, as who I was. So the next part I started thinking about was about creative reawakening, and I had a couple of questions. So again, you know, utilize these if they're helpful. Did I miss a part of myself that had been silenced or buried? And what parts of me come alive when I paint that are asleep in other parts of my life? So I think I've sort of covered, did I miss a part of myself and did I feel buried? I definitely did. I just didn't feel like myself. I noticed these sparks of aliveness that I feel when I'm creating. You know, I'm like, even if I'm just like choosing colours, like, what supplies should I use? Should I use my watercolours? Should I use some inks? Do I need my alcohol? Do I need my, this is for artwork, by the way, because I don't drink at the moment at all. And then I've got a water spray and stuff, and all the, you know, the juicy colours that I love. I love this blue, it's gorgeous. And all my brushes, and it's just like, oh, you know, I mean, I could arrange and fondle all my brushes and art supplies. I think if you're a creative, you will completely know what I mean. My mum has a craft room, and she just loves going up there and like looking through all her lace and her papers and her bits and bobs and all her fabrics and paints and brush. You know, it's just to go through it and, you know, have a little fondle of your little things. It's just really nice. You know, I mean, this is a dirty old watercolor palette, but I love it so much. You know, it's one of my besties. The feeling I get, you know, when I grab my sketchbooks and, you know, maybe look through and see things that I don't like and see things that I do like, and wonder about what's going to come out on the page next. You know, it lifts me in a way I can't describe. It's almost like electric sparkles. And yes, there's fear in that, you know, am I going to do a bad job and make a terrible painting? And lots of times I do, and that's completely okay, because that's how we learn. I've got lots of videos about that up. But at the same time, losing myself while I'm in the creative process, it becomes a spiritual experience for me, a connection to the divine, an extremely sacred time in my day, for sure. And if I haven't been creating, I needed to build more creative time recently, to be honest, because I've been struggling to get to the studio as much because I broke my toe, and I'm also looking after my daughter's dog as well, who is gorgeous, but he takes up quite a lot of my extra time. So I've had to kind of wiggle things around a little bit to fit my creativity in. Anyway, I digress again. I do try not to. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so yeah, those are the parts of me that come alive again. And it's something that I really struggle to explain, to describe. You have to let me know how you feel when you're really in that flow of your creativity. And of course, there's times when you're not in your flow, and that's when we need to be devoted, be a disciple, and have discipline, and just create anyway. Of course, Picasso very wisely said, creativity exists, but it has to find you working. So you have to be doing it in order to get into the flow. You can't just get into the flow while you're thinking about it. So that's very important, isn't it? It's not just this magical, dreamy experience. It's, you know, it can be quite a bit of a battle. You have to fight a little bit with yourself, that you have to encourage yourself and sometimes force yourself to do things, especially if it's out of your comfort zone or your usual arena of doing things. Yeah, but it's worth it. The final part I started asking myself with a few questions, which I'll share in a sec, was about personal truth and personal growth. Because for me, that's a big part of creativity and what the creativity brings me. The healing part, which I talk about all the time, especially in relation to my art journals, which is a completely different style of artwork to me, even though there's crossover between my more fine art pieces and my art journaling. It's definitely a different mindset. So often, say with art journaling, for example, I won't use source materials or reference. It all comes straight out of my head. So it's more art of the imagination and let what needs to come out. And then there's a lot of words mingled in with that. So I'm a little bit of a wordsmith as well. I love words and painting pictures with words, and particularly poetry, which is my very first video on YouTube, which was before I really started my YouTube channel. You can go back and watch the very first video, which is called Secrets of a Fairy, which was my poem. And I was reading out a poem on the, and I thought I'll just put it on YouTube. And that wasn't really the beginning of my YouTube journey, but yeah, that is the very first video I've got up here, because it does paint a picture with words. And so it's anything that's kind of about making images, visualizing, feels very important to me. So I asked myself, was painting a way to say something I didn't know how to put into words? So I think that's a definite yes, particularly when I do things like asemic writing and code writing in my underlayers. So often in my paintings I've got underlayers of things that you can't see at the end, so you wouldn't know they were there, but they are underneath all the layers. And then sometimes I've got, things that you can just see a little bit of, a little snippet of. It definitely has a message underlying there, even if it's words that are not in code. And sometimes there's words, literal words in there that you can pick out and read, but it might be a little bit of an abstract idea without all the background of what is underneath. I feel like the layering process in art which can be lost a little bit if you're doing sort of more alla prima kind of style, which I do quite a lot with watercolour as well. It's just a lot faster drying than a lot of my other things, a lot of my other materials. I do think that the layering process tells the story. So it is all about telling your own personal story through your creativity, even if it's not in the most sort of obvious and classic way of doing it, like, a written story. Another question I asked myself was, did I paint in order to feel close to someone or something? And I think the answer to that was myself. I needed to feel closer to myself. I needed to find out what was down there. What were all the traumas? What was buried in inner Wendy? That was almost like I felt really disconnected from myself, which wasn't just about teaching and being in that sort of career scenario. It was also about just finding myself again on that journey of rediscovery, if you like, in a way that in my early 40s when I left, I didn't put that in the timeline yet, did I? I didn't mention that, but I was in my early 40s when I left my profession. At that point, I needed to rediscover Wendy in a deeper way that I never had before. Because I think we kind of go through a second adolescence and puberty in our 20s, and I think we go through it again in our 30s. This is all linked probably to the planets and the astrologicals and your Saturn return and all that, if you're into that, which I am. I love astrology aspects of it as well. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew I needed to go deep and to really find out who I was and what I needed to do, what I needed to be, how I needed to let my insides come out. I think often we're asking ourselves these big questions, aren't we, like about life purpose and what should we be doing and what are our innate gifts that we've got that we could then offer the world. And it's no good going without out there to ask these questions, is it? We have to go within, and in order to go within we need time and space to do that. When I look back now and I see, you know, James and I, because we've been together a long time and we were certainly together then, and he allowed this space for me to grow and reform, if you like. I had restored my inner soul. It was allowed to take up more space than ever before, and there was more truth and authenticity to it than ever before, which has only accelerated and become more and more and more of myself since I've grown older and older and older, certainly through the menopause tunnel. And I've got more videos about that, and I think I might make another video on menopause. So if that's something that you'd like to talk about or you've got things to say about, I would love to hear in the comments as well, because it's a massive portal of wonder and discovery. Totally in awe of it, and the experience that I've had, obviously not always easy, being squeezed. I felt like I was being squeezed through a tunnel, and obviously there's challenges with that, but the actual process of it, of realization and just coming to the knowing of, I've got unfinished business I need to finish. I have got wisdom that I've always known that is going to come out. I've got things in my life that are now non-negotiable. They either have to be like that or they have to go. I'm very grateful for every spark of wisdom that comes out of that. So I did need to go back to art and my painting to feel close to myself again, but in a new way. I think for me, painting was an act of reclamation. It was a way of reclaiming my soul. It was also, in a way, answering my own inner rebel. I think I've talked about this a little before. You know, I've always been a bit of a rebel. I've always been very blunt. My mum used to call me John Blunt as a child because I was, you know, really blunt. And so doing what I wanted without really worrying about sort of the income and the finances, I had a little bit of money saved up. And we ended up selling our house, so we had more money in our savings, which we ended up using to buy a van and travel around Europe for several years. So that was my great act of rebellion, I think, from that. And it was born out of this little pencil fairy that I did the few years previous to that moment. Yes. So I blame the fairies for sure. It was definitely the fairies talking to me in my ears, who also told me where I should be. You know, I was listening to messages from the trees, from the land, and really connecting with my inner voice as well. But it was like a very magical, insightful, intuitive listening. Yes. And I can't leave this conversation without saying that for me, creativity is an everlasting process of healing, definitely. So if you've watched any of my other videos, especially about art journaling, you will know about that as well. So if you've ever lost touch with something that you loved, or with yourself, I hope this reminded you that it's never too late to begin again. Our creative paths are all unique. They don't have to be fast or tidy or even certain. They just need to be ours. So a little reminder to add your comments down there if you feel like sharing, and I will leave you in peace for now. Try to keep your light shining as bright as you can. I will if you will. Self-care to the max, and I'll see you really soon in the next one. Bye for now. Bye for now.